My Chinese name is too hard for you. So something about myself. This is the 7th trip that I've been to Cambodia. So the 6th other trip, I go mostly to actually pay back instead of like staying on hand. And some interesting thing, the smallest thing that I worked on before was like a contactless smart card using the Java card library. That was when I'm trying to program a phone, which was actually very fun because it's the first phone to embed a contactless smart card into it. And then the biggest thing that I work on is currently my project, which is a Ruby on Rails application. Currently, it spans more than 10 servers across 2 different data centers. Yeah. So the things I'm going to talk about today is mostly about the people that I work with and the process that I use every day. So before I start into what my process is all about, I just want to state that each project is actually unique in their own nature, their values, and their business objective. And then we need to actually note that method of practice may work in one project but not another. So the Agile Manifesto, which you see here very often today, came from 17 independent software development thinkers who are trying to improve the environment in which our customer actually operates in. I do firmly believe in this, but what I want to share with you today is more about how our experience actually helped us make the project better, and it's important for you to find what works for you and also your team. So before I start, let me introduce the people that I work with every day. So we have the business. So they are also called the product owners. And our job as like in ThoughtWorks on the project is to actually deliver value to the business. We also want to actually understand how the business works through their experience and how we can actually make things better in their environment. We also have the business analysts, which we call them as like BA in short. They actually work closely with business to actually understand what are their needs and also help to prioritize them. Yep. So they also write stories, which you'll actually see later, and which developers will use to develop like the features later on. So there are people like me, developers. Generally, we work in pairs, meaning like 2 people work on a single workstation doing a single functionality. And I will tell you more about this later. We also use other practices such as like test-driven development, which I'll also show you in depth later. Last but not least, we have the QA. So I guess you all are quite familiar with the term QA, and they are the people who tries to ensure the quality standards of the software. But it's important to note that they are not the gate of quality, because they don't sign off the code and say like, okay, this code is good, but they help to ensure that, okay, we do testings and we do exploratory testing and to make sure that everything is covered as much as possible. Lastly, they also highlight risks. For example, there's this part of software, this is new to the users, you may not know how to use it, and things like that. They also do release planning, saying that, for example, this feature is going to be released on this date, and how we are going to release it, and what are the things that we need to do before the release actually happens. So these are the main roles that I actually work with every day. But I want to actually say that there are also other roles like designers. There's actually one here, which did, and also like client principals. Yeah. So how's my day looks like? So this is generally what it is. Don't be scared by it. I'll go through each of them slowly. Okay? Let's start. So the first thing that I do every day is like stand up. It happens like when we all go into the office. It is like at 9 usually. So this is a photo of what my team stand up is. We also gather around the wall, which is this one, this wall. Okay? And then we'll actually talk about updates and stuff. A close-up look on the wall is something like this. We don't exactly follow what Scrum is or Kanban is, but we kind of have our own style. So what our style looks like is, in short, something like this. So what does each of the column actually mean? So in the ready for kickoff column, it means that the business and the BA or the business analyst has worked together to write a story card, which is something like a physical card that will be stick onto the wall. Okay? So this will be meant that, okay, as a developer, I can pick this up when I have nothing to do and start working on it. And then if let's say when a developer come in, so I'll take a card like this and I'll put it into the in-depth column. Which this meant that I'm going to start work on it now. When I finish, I push it into the ready for QA column, and the QA can actually pick it up when they are ready. QA will start testing it and then put it in the QA column. Once they are complete, they move it again. So once QA finish testing for the QA complete, business will come in and say, okay, this story has finished testing and also finished development. Then I'll actually sign out the story by pushing it into the ready for showcase column. This may differ project to project because like sometimes there may be a contract requirements where the business must sign on each of the story. And then what do we do during the stand up actually? So what we do is we go through each of the column with everyone's presence. So there will be business, sometimes they could be like 3 to 4 product owners, developer, the QA and also the BA. So everyone will be there in the stand up. We walk through like the QA column, go through each of the story, ask for updates, highlight any risks or issues that we faced in the previous day. And also the most important thing is we need to share our failures. Why do we need to do so? Because when everyone knows what we failed to do yesterday or the mistake that we did previous day, then the team will actually learn about it and not repeat it again. So this is a process where everyone will learn the same thing and then not repeat the same mistake. So what other benefit does stand up actually does? Stand up actually allow us to catch up on what is happening in the team day to day. For example, if I come in during lunch, I skip the stand up in the morning. So I can actually go to this wall and say, okay, this is what happened previous day and what story has been moved. And then I can get a mental idea of like, okay, these are the things that are done and these are the next things that could be started. We also want to progress as a team. For example, during stand up, I could say, yesterday I was trying to implement a JavaScript library and I failed to do it because I encountering some errors. I could actually share this problem with the team during stand up and say, okay, I can't implement this library properly and I'm looking for people who have experience working with this library to help me. And then maybe someone could actually stand up and actually pair with me to work on the story, for example. So what happened after stand up? We do something like a sign up where we say, okay, this is a story that is ready for kickoff. We put it in there I take my avatar, which consists of my photo and my name, and stick it onto the story card. It means that me and Brian is actually working on the story together. So the avatar also serves another purpose. For example, I am new to the team and I don't know each of your name. What I can do is I go to the wall, okay, I see the photo, I see the name, and I remember as much as possible. So this kind of like keep track of the people that's in the team. So this is what generally in the morning we do, which is stand up and sign up. So after we sign up for a story, we will do a kickoff. So the story that we actually signed up previously, for example, this story number 1211, there will be a story tag, story that is actually written on the card itself. For example, as a role could be like a finance executive or a user. I want to see something, for example, see all the views in my homepage so that I can achieve an objective. So this tells us what we are actually building and what we want to achieve. We also provide value to the developers in terms of, okay, this is the context and this is what I'm going to achieve after doing the story. And you also provide like intent, which is, for example, this story is intent to start a certain features, and this intent will actually allow us to actually have certain design considerations as and when it's needed. So the story also has a set of acceptance criteria, which also meant that what are the value we are trying to deliver to the business. So like given a certain scenario, when I do something, and then I will see maybe all my views. And then we actually gather all the people that's involved, which is like the business, the dev pairs, the QA, and also the BA. So this actually provides context to the business, for example, like what the developer is doing currently and how it will be done. Because when we start with reading the story and the acceptance criteria, we will check what's the existing behavior. So currently, when I go into the home page, it could be blank. And then I'll discuss the outcome of the story, which is when, okay, I'll add a new link on the home page that says, shows all my view. And then when the user click it, the user can see all the views that come up. Then I could discuss what is the testing strategy that I'll take. For example, I will do a UI testing where I'll test the link works and it shows some content. And then I'll do unit testing, for example. I'll test like the controllers or the model returns the correct data that I need. Then we may highlight any issues or blockers that we may face during the kickoff. For example, the copy changes or the text that I place on the link may not be ready. I may want to actually have the business review the text after the story has been complete, for example. So after the story kickoff, we will generally start with the development straight away. So a pair will only have a single story. And we adopt practices such as like pairing and also test-driven development. So what does pairing actually mean? So it means that, okay, two guys, a pair of developers, maybe me and a senior guy, who work on a single functionality on a single workstation. Okay? So when we do this, okay, Brian could actually show me how to do the the features if I am new, for example. But how does this actually add values to the client and the business? So first thing would be actually to share the context. For example, if Brian has worked on this part of the application and I have not touched on this before, okay, then Brian will actually show me, okay, so this part of the application, there's this, and he could actually walk me through the code. Okay, there's this functionality and there's this set of assumption that is actually in place here and things like that. So a new guy like me could actually learn along the way without having to read documentations or even read through the code myself. Second, it also allows us to actually share experience. For example, Brian is actually very senior and he knows a lot of design patterns, a lot of testing strategies, and etc. He can actually try to use some of the things that he knows when he writes this story, and then I could actually learn, oh, so this is how you implement this design pattern. But when we actually do pairing, two developers actually look at the same code. For example, when Brian writes a piece of code, I can actually see, okay, this is maybe not so good, can improve. Or I write, then Brian can see, okay, maybe you can use another model or object in this situation, for example. So both of us, when we pair together, we will actually produce a more linear code and a code that everyone could actually understand in the long run. Because, for example, I may write in a name that Brian couldn't understand. Then we will communicate and say, okay, this is a better name to actually use. It also helps to do team building together. For example, after I pair with Brian for a few days, I understand how Brian is like. Maybe he has a tempo somewhere, or he's very he has a very short attention span. I could actually understand how he works, and then I could actually adapt accordingly to his behavior. So how do we actually start pairing when each of us as developer are so used to working alone? So one way that you can start is a driver navigator style. Okay? So this way, Brian is actually holding the compass. So he will tell me, okay, this is how you're going to write this code. He will provide me with guidelines, or maybe how he thinks the code will look like. And then I will actually implement the code. So Brian also look at the general well-being of the system. For example, the overall design patterns that I use, or the collaboration between one system and another system. Another style that you can actually use, so what will we do in this style? So imagine the ball as the keyboard. The person who starts first will implement, for example, a test. After the test fails, then the person that starts the test will actually pass the keyboard to me. Okay, I will type the code and make sure the test pass. Implement the next test and pass it to Brian. So it's like we are playing ping pong where we pass the ball back and forth. So this is what pairing generally is, but there's actually more things that you can actually do with pairing. Do talk to me if you face any issues or you want to know more about it. Second thing that I'm going to talk about for the practices that I use during development will be test-driven development. So what is it like? So generally when we do a functionality or a feature, we will start with a failing test on top. Okay? We'll implement a test, okay, run the test, and it will fail because the functionality has not been implemented yet. Okay? I will then implement the most minimal set of functions to pass the test, and then the next test. Okay? So we will do this cycle until the bare minimum functionality set has been completed, for example.
Why do we do this?
Because we want to ensure that we implement the minimum code to actually implement the functionality.
What problems are we solving?
What we are trying to solve the fact that sometimes we may implement functionality where there's actually no need for that functionality, for example. So after we have the test as a confident harness, okay, we could actually do refactoring. So you can actually try to make the code better or more lean. Then we'll refactor, run the test again, and make sure that it passes. So if the test goes red, for example, we know that we miss a functionality that we removed during the refactor stage. And we will repeat this cycle with a failing test, make it go green, then refactor it until the whole set of functionality for the story has been completed. So why do we do test-driven development? One of the reasons is that we want to tighten the feedback loop. So if a test fails, we know that it's because of us, changes to the code that caused the test to fail. And we want to fail fast. When we change something, we run the test and it fails, it ties the outcome to us and we must correct it before we push the code, for example. So this is generally the two practices that I use during development. And I'll move on to what we do after, for example, we implement or we have a set of commits. We will push the code into the existing application. We want to integrate the new code early and also fail early. Because this new code could not work with the existing application, for example. Who knows if it actually breaks or it works? We don't know. So we have something that looks like this, which is a pipeline. So at each of the stage, we actually do some specific tasks. For example, we do unit testing, we package the application, we run some UI testing, deploy it into different environments as is needed. So this way, it actually allows us to detect the problem early. So when it actually package or maybe it automates something, the UI testing, it may fail, then we can actually get the feedback fast. So after packaging, we actually do have a single package that will be actually deployed to all the environments in sequence. So it's actually the same code that is actually deployed into different environments. And each of the environments are identical to each other. So if I know that it works in the QA environment, I will know that it works in staging and also the production environment. So summarizing this, we will actually script everything from testing, packaging, infrastructure, and also deployment. We try to actually minimize the human intervention as much as possible. So this actually helps us to actually ensure consistency on the repeated tasks that we actually do. So after we push the code into the CI environment, we actually do a dash check, for example. If everything is working as of what we expect, we could actually use maybe the QA environment for a dash check. So what do we do during a dash check? We actually go through the card again, go through the acceptance criteria again to make sure that we miss nothing. We make sure that the pipeline goes green. Okay? Then we will gather all the people that is there for kickoff. We will demo the functionality, for example, on the QA environment. And then go through maybe some of the corner cases to ensure that we finish the story. At times, the business could actually use the system themselves to actually check that the functionality is actually working of what to their expectations. And something interesting that we found out is that most of the defects also are usually found during the dash check stage. Like forgetting to actually implement an edge case, or like certain issues like the label or the message needs to be updated. And it is also important to note that it's not just kickoff and dash check that we actually talk with the business. We have conversation with the business as and when it is needed. For example, some clarifications or some issues with the design that we want to highlight. After we're done with dash check, we will actually push the card into ready for QA column. So once we have all the functionality that is completed over time, what we will do is we'll do a showcase. So we will actually try to show the business what we have completed. So there's a column, the last column, where we have all the cards that are ready for showcase. We actually gather the business stakeholders. There could be users, higher management, or even external parties that could actually join the showcase. What we will do is that we will go through each of the story that is delivered. Okay, we will show them, okay, this story, what will happen and what changed. And then we'll go through a small discussion to see what's the next stage for the product. It is also very important to note that we want to provide business with an update every now and then to show them the progress that we are having. We also allow the business to actually change the directions and if they realize that there is something that deserves their attention too. For example, after we implement feature 1 and the business felt that another feature is very important, and they actually can change the priority of the features. So after showcase, when everything is okay and we are good to go, we'll actually go into production. So in production, what we do is that we just need to trigger the pipeline where we deploy from the staging environment to the production environment. The scripts will take care of updating the applications and also make sure that we remember to do all the steps like restarting the servers, restarting the queues, and etc. We want to deploy as frequent as possible so that we can get feedback early. Never stop trying to improve your current process, and you will succeed one day. Any questions? Anyone?
team, what is the time and how easy to get those people along together and do the checks?
Okay, so your question is how much time I need to gather all the people I need for dash check. So for my project currently, we work in the client place. So the client actually sits 2 tables away from us. So what we need to do is to catch them when they are free, and then catch the BAs and the QAs, and then we'll be able to do a dash check. So generally, we maybe need to wait at most 30 minutes, and we should actually get all the people that we need. Does that answer your question?
How what is important?
So your question is, why is dash check important? So usually the business, when we do a dash check, we'll go through the scenario with the business, and then the business sometimes will need to highlight a certain issue, for example. So we have...
What is the dash check solved? What's the problem? What was the previous image, or what was the previous practices that we should know about that there's a problem, and that's why there's a dash check? What is it solving?
So your question is, what is the problem that exists before that? That's why we need to have a dash check. Okay, so in the past, when we do waterfall, so we start with functional requirement gathering, and then we do development, then we do a whole big system dash check. But what we do now instead is we will check each of the functionality as a small feature, so that we don't need to maybe check the whole system in general.
We do waterfall, right?
I think this is the first time that I've heard
about the dash checks. Waterfall has the problems of feedback being delayed all the way to the end of the project, so that when we come back, oh my god, when the client sees there's a bunch of things we have to change, that's why we move the dash check forward.
Any comments?
The sprint review is actually at the end of the sprint. One of the reasons why the idea is that if there's a feedback to be given, waterfall might automate to the end, sprint review might automate to the sprint. We want to move it forward as fast as possible, so that you get the feedback as soon as possible, so you can start doing something about it. So on this team, it might be similar to the sprint review, but on some team, it literally is just as soon as you finish working, you get the business and you dash check, and that's why they call it a dash check as opposed to a review. We all know what problem it causes if you get this feedback too late, right?
So how often do you have these dash checks? Of course it depends, but just in general, is it the team has once a day a dash check, or if there are really small issues, is there every hour a dash check?
So the question is, how often we have dash check? How much time in between each of the dash check? So a dash check will happen at the end of a story card. For example, if I have a story card that actually implements this feature, okay, it shows a link that brings me to a page where it shows all the build. So once I implement the whole feature, I will call for a dash check. It depends on how fast you implement this feature. So if, for example, if this is a bug, for example, and this link is not showing, once I fix the bug, I will call for a dash check immediately. So it could be as short as a few hours, or maybe 1 or 2 days.
But just for you in real, in the daily work, of course it depends how large the user story is, what it includes. So what is for you a normal day? On a normal day, how many dash checks do you have in your team?
how many dash check?
I mean, I'm just interested in
Usually, on average, once a day. If I'm working on like bugs, I may get like 3 to 4 dash check a day. Yeah, depending on how complex is the bug or how complex is the story. Yeah.
Depends on the team practices. Some teams book the business time beforehand, so there's a business time slot every day or every 2 days or whatever. Sometimes the business is available all the time, then this team can go and grab the business as soon as possible.
because I could imagine like that if you have 4 or 5 or whatever, it causes also a lot of interruption to other developers.
If that's the case, then you batch it out. But if that's the case, then you probably slicing the stories too small, right? So,
One of the practices that we use in my project is to have golden hours, where, for example, like 3 to 5, we will not touch the business to do any dash check or kickoff, for example.
What about the best check rule that it check only the functionality that is fit for the user coding, or it check the quality of
Okay, so your question is, does the dash check the quality of the code and like whether testing has been done and things like that? Is it the question?
I mean, they check everything, or they just focus on the functionality that it fit with the user's coding.
Okay, so when we do dash check, what we usually do is we'll run an automation scenario. So you'll run the automation happy path, and then maybe we'll pause it in between. We'll show the user, okay, this is what you're going to expect, and then continue the automation. So this actually help us do 2 things at one time. One is that we have automation that actually tests that happy path or the story, and then the functionality also work as what we expect. But we don't actually go into the code to see, okay, if this code is clean and things like that. So this is usually done in the QA phase. Like you'll check like if there's actually unit testing that's implemented or things like that. But it also depends on the project if you have such an allowance to do such a review.
So it's more like the utility test, like
Yes, something like a user acceptance test, but smaller.
in your project, so I have developers mostly working on the campus, working on there.
Yes, in my project, 99% of the time, all the developers will pair. Unless like there's like 11 developers, and then one will need to work on their own.
Yes, for me, my question is that I think working in VR is good because we can share each other. However, do you think that it will challenge with the time and budget and VR?
Okay, challenge with the time and budget.
what's the problem that having solved?
This means, for example, like if for my experience, one person is working on one issue, and like it is working, we can work together in pair. But usually in your project, you are working in pair together. So I think for me, it is was time on working on one project because it is doesn't work sometimes.
Yeah, it sounds like the manpower is reduced by half.
Yes.
Okay.
Programming all the time.
So the question is whether pair programming actually like create wastage. Okay, pair programming, it may look as if it is creating wastage at the start, but you must look at the problem it's trying to solve, and then also the benefit that it creates. For example, if let's say we are working on a story today, me and Brian, but I'm sick tomorrow. If I work alone, the story will be blocked. If I'm sick for a month, the story will be blocked. But if I work in pairs, Brian could actually pick up the story and then maybe get Pete to join Brian. Then Pete and Brian could actually work on it together. And then we also do code reviews, like mini code reviews when we pair. And then we don't need to do a separate code review at the end. And we ensure that, okay, if I say that this code that me and Brian writes is okay, it means that it is accepted by the team. And then we don't do a code review at a later stage. So it's actually saving time and also like increasing the productivity in general. So there was actually a study that says that pairing actually increased the productivity by around, I think, 15% in general, and also creates other benefits. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I have a question about working in pairs as well. I think one of the basic tenets in quality assurance is that the person who creates the code doesn't also test the code. But if you have both people concurrently working on the code, then you don't have the kind of objectivity of a separate person who hasn't clapped eyes on the code to test it. So I was just wondering, if you have a separate QA function, which it sounds like you do, have you seen whether the QA, whether the code is actually better or worse?
So we are saying, the question is like, even if we pair, two person may not have like a third person point of view in terms of looking at the code. And then whether the QA actually helps to improve the code quality. Okay, so each of the functionality that we write has many touch points. So the first will be the business and the BA, and then the dev pairs. So when we pair, we actually we could do ping pong style, where we write the test first. So this ensures that the code quality is like meets the minimum standard, where there's a test covering the functionality. Okay, and then when the QA actually touch on the code, the QA could actually look at whether the test covers all the cases, and then if there's actually unique automations or UI testing that's testing the code in general. So I would say the code quality is actually better because partly because of the pairing and also the TDD practice that we use. And sometimes when we pair, we also bounce ideas. For example, I could say, oh, maybe we should test this. Then after we test this, we may come to an unexpected result. Oh, this doesn't work as what we expect. Then we'll try to implement the functionality and things like that. So we always communicate and bounce ideas off each other.
I have a question back about the your point outline.
Okay.
Yes, actually, I wondering what is the point to show environment? What does it look like? And another question is, in testing and automation, who is responsible to create that test?
Okay, so there's two questions. The first question is who uses the QA environment and what is required there, right?
I mean, what is deployed to QA environment is there?
Okay.
What is that? And the unit testing and automation, who is responsible to create this?
Okay, so let me answer your first question first. What is deployed to the QA environment? Okay, depending on your project, sometimes you can use the QA environment for the QA to do exploratory testing. For example, I may scramble the data in some ways and can see how the application reacts to the environment, to the code, okay, to the data. Sorry. We actually the reason why we have an environment where the QA can test is so that this environment mimics the production environment. Maybe I could want to do performance testing, and I keep pinging or keep sending requests to the environment and see how it reacts. Will it crash? Will it react differently? Or what? Will you check what is the expected behavior? Does that answer your first question? Okay, so the second question, who writes the test for automation and unit testing? So I would say that it's developers who writes both automation and unit testing. but this is the first part of the answer. So how do we do it? We actually write unit test, UI testing first. Let's say we test that there's a link there, and then what is the expected behavior, and etc. etc. Then we will let the UI test fail. Okay. Then we move on to implement, let's say, a link, but doesn't do anything. Then we move on to a unit testing and write each of the tests in the controller level, service, and then the model, etc. But QAs will also write automation and sometimes unit testing because they may realize that, okay, there's a scenario that is not tested by the developers. And then they will actually write maybe a new test and see how the application works to the new test, for example. So generally, 2 people actually write these tests. Yeah.
In T3CON15 said one developer programs to the test fields.
Yeah.
What happens if the test never fails?
So we're talking about this. Ping pong. Okay. So you're saying that when one developer writes the test, and what if the test doesn't fail?
Yeah.
Then the other pair should actually question what's the rationale of you writing this test, and is the test what we want? Because it could be already what is expected, or the test could be set up wrongly, or we may be implementing a feature that is already there, for example. Yeah.
So the other guy never gets to program.
It's up to the pair. So for example, if I do something, okay, for example, if I'm the one who write the first test and then it never failed, then I should actually communicate with my pair. So should I actually write another test, or do you want to take over?
You will always have a failed test though, right? Your first thing you do is to write a failed test. You will always have a failed test.
Not exactly.
That's very development.
Yeah, because I faced a scenario before where our code kind of expect the edge case to be there. But the edge case end up to be a new feature, which then, when we write the first set of tests, we pass. Yeah.
I think there's still a gap of why are we writing it.
Who will do the refactoring of the code? It's actually the pair that is working on the story that will do the refactoring of the code. So this cycle is done by the pair when they do the development of the story.
So it means that when, for example, like we do developing on one issue and then it failed, so they need to fix it.
Yeah.
And then after it passed, they need to refactor it.
Yeah.
And refactoring is also in pair, right?
Yes.
And
in general, we will try to actually bounce ideas off and see how we can actually make the code better than the way when we arrive.
so, for example, like if the issue is not failed, so they finish it and it passed,
Okay.
test it and passed, and then they need to refactor it again or just put it to the other place.
I guess, for example, the code is very perfect, one line each method, and etc. And then the pair felt that there's no need to do a refactoring, then maybe they will not do. I think it really depends on what's the state of the code that is currently at.
Don't you think that if someone refactoring becomes better than others refactoring? Because we look at it again and again, and it seems that we used to it, but if someone else who found the other idea or knowledge of it and go to refactoring, it is maybe better than us.
So the question is, if another person look at the code, will it be better when we do refactoring? I think the question, even though the pair refactor the code, another pair which pick up another story may touch the same piece of code again, then you can actually do the refactoring if there's a need to. I guess my time is up. Maybe if you have any question, you can catch me like after this or something. Yeah. Or
I have one last question.
oh yes.
Okay, so like I know that you're trying to ensure that the quality is good on your product,
Okay.
and like try to make sure that your client happy with the feature that you deliver. But if we think back to the budget of the client, and I can see that you spend a lot of time on checking the quality, and then like example of one stream, 1 2 week stream, or one stream, not many features are going to deliver, and you spend a lot of time, and then if you think of the budget of the client, I think that it might not, like what kind of client that you think that it is acceptable for you.
Okay.
And like, yeah.
So your question is, given that you do so much checking on the quality of the code, will we deliver lesser features given a specific budget and a timeline? Am I correct?
Yeah.
So I think we shouldn't look at like just how maybe a 1 week period delivers. Okay, for example, I may write a lot of features in the first 1 week, but my quality may not be as good. When the quality decreases over time, you actually makes the whole code base harder to add new features as you go longer. So my current project is spending, it's a custom application, so it has been going on for more than a year. So if we were to sacrifice the quality and deliver more features, the code quality will actually go down along the way. And then it will actually impact what we can deliver maybe at the end of 1 year stage maybe, because the quality could reach to a stage where it is very hard to add a new feature. And then it will actually impact at the end.
There's a concept called plan-driven development and versus value-driven development. Like the first question you will have to ask is why is delivering this feature a bad thing? In the old day, plan-driven development, like you are doing really well if you think of it on time, on budget, on resource, right? Like that's your main, that's your concern. But that's plan. Like, is it really what the users are paying you money for? Is that the value? We don't think so. And in the value-driven development, value is first. Value is what the users are paying for your product. It changed. User change, market change, time change. That means that nothing's moving all the time. And in order to move with the change, you need to have quality. Because, like, if tomorrow you need a new feature, you want your code base to be adaptive. That's where these practices come in. It ensures that things run without bugs, automated all the testing so that you don't have to spend your time on quality control over and over and over and over again. And be adaptive. Like, make sure that you refactor the code properly, make sure that in any direction that you want to go, you can. Once you have those bar down, then the constraint is the only thing that's it's a triangle, right? Like you got value, you got quality, and then that time, resources, and scope becomes just one arm of the triangle. That's the thing that moves. That's why Agile is different than waterfall, because if you want to fix the value, you want to fix the quality, then the only thing that has to move is time, scope, resources. And that's why the clients that will go for that is the clients that look at value, not plan.
I guess you overshot. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.